In his submission, the Spanish ambassador to the UN, Fernando Arias, reflected on the C24 seminar last month. He said Spain defends its belief that each non-self-governing territory should be treated as an individual case, and pragmatic solutions should be sought when necessary. Senor Arias said the wishes of the colonized people are important and should be taken into account in cases where there isn't a conflict between member states. He said Gibraltar's case is a special one because the concept of colonialism by consent isn't consistent with UN doctrine and infringes on Spain's territorial integrity. Senor Arias said Spain encourages a negotiated solution to Gibraltar and cannot accept, under any circumstances, that the current situation is a perpetual one, where the wishes of the Kingdom of Spain are ignored. He described the Trilateral Forum for Dialogue as a method by which Spain hoped to improve the lives of people in Gibraltar and the surrounding Campo region, and create a favourable framework for the discussion of the sovereignty question. Chief Minister, you mentioned in your address that successive Chief Ministers have been addressing the United Nations for the last 50 years. Do you believe that anything has changed or progressed in that time?
Well, look, it may be that nothing has changed or progressed, and that may be a very good thing, because if there hadn't been chief ministers here for 50 years, or since half a century ago, they haven't been here consistently, it may be that Spain may have advanced her claim in a particular way. So either as a stopgap or in order to advance things in our direction, I think it's fundamentally important that we should be here.
You used some pretty strong language to address the committee. You described them as deaf to our pleas. Do you believe that this will endear the committee to act, or perhaps it might irk them?
Well, I think I've been the third Chief Minister to do that. I think Mr. Posano said that on some occasions. He's repeated that now in the seminar. I think Mr. Caruana said much the same when he was Chief Minister. So it's not something new, but it has resulted in the chairman of the committee wanting to say that they appear to want to act. We've seen in the change of the UN website that they have said very clearly that self-determination applies to all the territories. We have to resist this move to an ad hoc process on a case-by-case basis. That's what Spain wants. And the idea that there's a different principle applicable, which is not self-determination, to cases where there is a sovereignty dispute. Actually, the Falklands and Gibraltar, there are no others. So we've got to resist those attempts to try and avoid our international rights, and stimulating the committee to understand that and to act, because it's got a sacred trust for us, not for Spain or for Argentina, for the Falklanders, for Gibraltar, and for the people of the 16 territories. Then that is the action that we want to see them take, and it's important that we stimulate them in that context.
This year is the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Utrecht, and you've made that quite a recurring theme in your address.
It was important because of the 300th anniversary, 309th anniversary of a British Gibraltar, 300th anniversary of Utrecht, to talk about that treaty and compare it with our rights under the UN Charter, which are much more modern rights and which are overwhelmingly the rights that are relevant in international law. And that gave us the opportunity of comparing what Spain bases their claim, repeatedly, as you know, Utrecht, this dusty old document, and what we base our rights on, which is the UN Charter and the resolutions that have come after that, setting out the rights of colonial people to decolonization.
Very topical as well, and also formed part of your address, the recent news concerning Gibraltar's successful entry into UEFA.
Something said by way of information, not because there is any political connotation, but by way of information, so that the committee knows that Spain even puts obstacles in our way in respect of joining sporting associations, to show how unsporting Spain is on many of these issues, and to inform the committee that Gibraltar wins every time that we have a fair hearing, as I told to the committee, game, set and match, although that's not a football analogy, but we always win big when we get a fair hearing.
And on that note, you've reissued your challenge for Spain to put its claim to the test before the International Court of Justice.
My challenge, and the challenge of all chief ministers of Gibraltar and leaders of the opposition before me, that Spain should test her pathetic arguments in an international, unbiased field, in a courtroom, whether it's the International Court of Justice in The Hague or the International Court for the Tribunal of the Law of the Sea in Berlin, in any fair and independent international tribunal. They know that if they go there, they will lose, and that's why they will never pick up the challenge.
And you also mentioned that the committee perhaps refer the Fourth Committee to test this claim themselves. Is this possible? Is this something that can be done?
An NGO recognized by the United Nations, either the Committee of 24 of the Fourth or the Fourth Committee, there is some law on whether it should be the Committee of 24 or the Fourth Committee, is able to ask the International Court for an advisory opinion, something we cannot do. NGOs recognized by the UN are recognized by the ICJ as parties that can engage the ICJ seeking an advisory opinion. That's what we've asked them to do. Don't hold your breath.
The first time that you addressed the UN, can you give us your thoughts at this moment?
Well, it's very hard to gauge exactly what the Committee of 24 is going to decide, what they're going to think, what they think about the intervention by the Chief Minister and myself. Hopefully, I think to a certain extent we were lucky in the sense that the Chief Minister made his address. The Spanish representative answered. Unfortunately, I had in my own address a number of points which I think knocked down the arguments of the Spanish delegates. So I think on the whole it's gone quite well.
Now, you've issued a call a number of times for the committee to visit Gibraltar, to send a delegation to learn for itself what Gibraltar is made up of. Are you surprised that they haven't replied?
No, I'm not surprised, because I think that to a very large extent the Committee of 24 sits on its hands. I mean, we're into the third decade of decolonization, and I'd like to know over the last 22 years how many territories have been decolonized of the original ones that were there when the first declaration was made for the eradication of colonialism. So I'm not surprised, but in these situations what one has to do is keep pushing, keep putting your arguments forward in the hope that one of these days somebody will sit up and take notice.
And I imagine that you'll be back again. You'll be addressing the UN again in future years?
I think that the chairman of the Committee of of the Self-Determination for Gibraltar group will be back. I don't think it'll be me.
Dr. Garcia, first of all, the Gibraltar's chief ministers have been coming to the UN for 50 years now. Do you feel that anything has changed in that time?
Well, you know, the policy of the government is to come to the UN twice a year. Once in June for the Committee of 24, then in October for the Fourth Committee. This time I think the useful thing to see has been the reaction from the chairman of the committee at the comments that we were making. This is the first time in all the years I've been coming to the Committee of 24 myself that the chairman has actually spoken and reacted to what Gibraltar was saying. I think that's important. We set out to jolt the committee, and we've achieved it.
Gibraltar's delegation has come to New York not just to address the UN, but to attend some other functions as well. Can you take us through those?
We have a meeting later on with investors who are interested in coming into Gibraltar. We're also meeting the members of the Gibraltar American Council, which is a very useful forum. As you know, it's been there for many years. So we're meeting them and discussing future strategies with them as well. And then after that, we're rushing back to Gibraltar on the plane to London.
Can you tell us what the Gibraltar American Council does in the time that you don't meet with them from year to year?
Well, we wanted to develop as a government the role of a council. If you remember last year, we issued a press release asking people to put their names forward if they had residents or relatives who lived in the United States who wanted to help. We have a list of those people now. Joe Garceni is coordinating all that in Gibraltar, and I know he works in the United States, and I know he works very closely with the Gibraltar American Council in planning the next step forward.
And I believe that the government has plans to expand the UN visit to include school children and students. Can you explain what those plans are?
We have a proposal in our manifesto to bring children from Bayside and Westside School to Gibraltar to the UN to see for themselves how the system works, to determine the importance of coming here and of spreading the Gibraltar message, which is that we are entitled to self-determination and to decolonization in the same way as every other territory on the UN list. So we'll be expanding the number of people who come here. You've seen the self-determination group have been here, and they've now spoken to the UN as well. It's something we want to develop further.
The GSD under Peter Caruana maintained its policy that going before the Committee of 24 wasn't necessary. But the opposition now has a new leader. We asked Daniel Feetham what his policy was.
Well, as you know, when we were in government, we had a policy of attending the Fourth Committee, which is the committee that deals with sovereignty, because it's important on issues of sovereignty that Gibraltar has a presence in the United Nations. On the Committee of 24, we took a different position, in particular post the introduction of the new constitution, because our position, it's been a long-standing position, is that the new constitution granted Gibraltar the maximum level of self-government short of independence and compatible with British sovereignty. Beyond our constitution, effectively, what we have is a constitution that is of an independence, of the nature of independence. Now, we looked at the situation where we said, well, look, that is the relationship that Gibraltar has with the UK in substance. We're going every single year to the Committee of 24. The Committee of 24 really is disregarding everything that we say. The Committee of 24, of course, deals with the question of delisting. Now, simply because Gibraltar is listed as in the list of non-self-governing territories doesn't mean that we are non-self-governing in nature. I mean, you have to look at the substance of it, and our constitution gives us a self-governing constitution. So we said, well, look, we're not going to bother again with the Committee of 24. We're not going to the Committee of 24 because we're satisfied that our relationship with the United Kingdom is a modern non-colonial relationship. Now, I have recently made statements, and I've said that, well, I am prepared, not because we're departing from our position of substance, on what the arguments are on substance, but prepared for the sake of national unity to go to the United Nations as part of a Gibraltar delegation with Mr. Picardo. He can deliver the speech. I'm not interested in delivering any speech myself, provided, of course, that we can agree the substance of that speech beforehand here in Gibraltar before we leave.
Now, the fact that you haven't attended presumably means that you haven't agreed.
Well, after I made my statements, there's been no attempt from Number 6 to contact me to invite me to go as part of a Gibraltar delegation. In fairness to them, it may well be that I made my statements 5 weeks ago and they never had any time. Certainly, my intention is that for next year, I intend to write to the Chief Minister myself and say precisely that if we can agree on the points of substance, on the speech that's going to be delivered, that I am prepared to attend the Committee of 24 as part of a Gibraltar delegation. But you've got to remember that our position is the same as the UK position in relation to this. Gibraltar has the maximum level of self-government compatible with continued British sovereignty of Gibraltar, which nobody wants to see us lose. Now, provided that is an acceptable position from where we start, then I can't see that there is any problem with agreeing a joint position. And quite frankly, some of the statements that Mr. Picardo has made, both in Parliament and also to the United Nations itself, are very, very similar to the position that I've described to you today in this interview.
Now, that's the C24. What about the fourth committee session in October?
Well, the fourth committee session in October, I have no problem as going as part of a Gibraltar delegation. I mean, again, I would wish to agree what is going to be said beforehand, because after all, Mr. Picardo and the GSOP Liberals at the last election obtained less than 50% of the votes. We obtained less than 50% of the votes, but it was a very close election. So, if we are going to effectively be going as part of a Gibraltar delegation representing all those people that supported us, as indeed the entirety of Gibraltar, there has to be an agreement in relation to the speech that is going to be delivered. I mean, I wouldn't want to be associated with a speech, for example, that was wildly off the mark in terms of, what is GSD policy. I don't think that, it would get to that. I think that it's not difficult to agree a joint position, and I hope that we can.
The Committee of 24 now makes recommendations to the fourth committee, which meets following the General Assembly in October. The fourth committee will then draft its consensus resolution, which will establish the UN's revised view on the Gibraltar question.